Let's kick things off with the most extreme case on the whole list, because Molly Hatchet doesn't just have 1 or 2 original members missing. It has 0. Not 1. Every single guy who played on those gritty, swampy southern rock records back in the 70s is gone. Danny Joe Brown, Dwayne Rowland, Banner Thomas, Steve Holland, even Dave Hlubeck, who actually came back for a stretch before he passed too. All of them. And yet Molly Hatchet is still out there, under the lights, playing Flirtin' with Disaster to crowds who might not realize they're watching 0% of the original band. Now, to be fair, the current guys play it tight, and somebody's got to keep those riffs alive for the next generation. But here's the real question, gentlemen. If every founder is in the ground and the songs are the only original thing left, are you watching Molly Hatchet or a very talented cover band with excellent legal paperwork? Next up is Blackfoot, a slightly stranger case, because the guy who started it actually signed off on the whole thing. Ricky Medlock founded Blackfoot and wrote the riffs. He gave later musicians his blessing to keep the name alive, and then promptly went back to Lynyrd Skynyrd, where he's been for decades. So now you've got the band Blackfoot with 0 founders on stage, fronted these days by guitarist and singer Tim Rossi, playing Train Train and Highway Song for rooms full of people who grew up on the originals. Some fans love it because at least the songs are staying alive instead of gathering dust. Others say the moment Medlock walked out that door, the band basically ended, and everything since has been running on borrowed name recognition. So here's the debate for the comments. Uncles, does a founder's blessing make a lineup legitimate, or is that just a polite way of selling the rights to your own legacy? Now, Kansas is the sneaky one, because technically, on paper, 2 founding members are still in the band. Drummer Phil Ehart and guitarist Rich Williams. The catch? Health issues have kept both off the road for long stretches, meaning you could buy a ticket to a Kansas show, sing along to Carry On Wayward Son all night, and never see a single founder in person. Ehart still steers the ship behind the scenes, and Williams pops in when he can, but the touring lineup right now is largely made up of musicians who joined decades after Dust in the Wind made the band famous. Unlike a lot of bands on this list, Kansas didn't collapse and dramatically reboot. It slowly, quietly evolved out from under itself over the years, which might honestly be the more unsettling version of this whole story. So if the founders are technically still employed but functionally invisible, on stage, is that still really Kansas? Or just Kansas Incorporated? Alright, brace yourselves. This one's gonna start a fight in the comments. Judas Priest. Ian Hill is the only member who's been there since the beginning, present on every studio album without exception. Respect where it's due. Glenn Tipton is technically still in the band, but Parkinson's has mostly pulled him off the road, meaning he might join for a song or two if you're lucky. The guitar work these days mostly falls to Richie Faulkner, now a member for well over a decade, and Andy Sneap, who originally signed on as a temporary fill-in, and just never really left. So depending how you count it, Priest is running on one true original and a small army of extremely qualified replacements. Fans who worship Rob Halford's voice say that's more than enough. Others argue Priest without Tipton's full presence just isn't the same band anymore. Buckle up, this might be the biggest debate on the whole list. Iron Butterfly is basically the poster child for lineup chaos. Over the past 5 decades, this band has run through so many members that for long stretches, literally nobody on stage had ever set foot in the studio for Inagata Da Vida, which, let's be honest, is the only reason most people can even name this band in the first place. Doug Engel, the vocalist and keyboardist, who basically was Iron Butterfly, retired years before he passed, and after that, the whole thing became something closer to a rotating cast than an actual group. Reunions happened, people quit, and people came back, licensing deals changed hands, and the identity of the band shifted depending entirely on who currently owned the rights to use the name that week. It's less a story about music and more a story about corporate ownership with a fuzz pedal attached. And honestly, it's a pretty perfect example of how a 17-minute drum solo can outlive absolutely everybody who originally played it. Canned Heat kept the boogie alive for decades, largely thanks to one guy, drummer Fito de la Parra, who technically wasn't even an original member, but ended up being the band's longest-serving one by a mile. Alan Wilson and Bob Haidt, the two personalities who actually defined the band's sound back at Woodstock, died decades ago back in the classic Rockstone age. So for years, Fito was essentially the historical thread keeping Canned Heat connected to its own legend, even though he joined after the band already existed. Once he passed, that thread snapped completely, leaving a lineup with zero connection to the group that famously tore up the stage at Woodstock in 1969. Is a genuinely interesting wrinkle in this whole conversation, honestly. Most of these bands are about founders clinging on or fading out. Canned Heat raises a weirder question. Can someone who technically wasn't even there at the start end up becoming the actual soul of the band anyway? The Suite might be the most confusing entry on this entire list, and that's saying something at this point. For years, multiple competing versions of The Suite toured simultaneously, which meant fans occasionally bought tickets having genuinely no idea which suite they were about to see. Andy Scott's version is generally recognized as the official continuation these days, but plenty of longtime fans will tell you the band's real identity walked out the door the moment Brian Connolly, Steve Priest, and Mick Tucker were gone for good. Throw in years of legal disputes over who actually owned the name, and you've basically got a glam rock trademark battle instead of a band.
The passionate one.
It's honestly a perfect little case study in how a name can quietly turn into a brand once the people who built it stop being around to defend it. So next time somebody says they're seeing the sweet life, maybe just ask them, gently, which one? Humble Pie is a short story with a simple, blunt truth at the center of it. Steve Marriott was Humble Pie. Full stop. That growling voice and manic stage energy basically was the entire personality of the band. So when he died in 1991, the band effectively died right along with him, no matter what happened afterward. Drummer Jerry Shirley later revived the name with a fresh lineup of musicians. And original guitarist Peter Frampton, who went on to have one of the biggest solo careers in rock history, has never once been part of these later versions. So you're left with a band name attached to 0 members from its most legendary lineup, trying to recapture a sound built entirely around one irreplaceable frontman. Fans remain genuinely and deeply split on whether that name should still be touring at all, or whether it should have been retired the day Marriott passed. Permanently. No revivals. No exceptions. Nazareth still technically has founding bassist Pete Agnew holding things down, so this one isn't quite a full wipeout like some others on this list. But here's the thing. The band's unmistakable identity was never really about the bass. It was about Dan McCafferty's absolutely gravelly, one-of-a-kind voice. Once health issues forced him into retirement, and eventually he passed away, a huge chunk of what made Nazareth sound like Nazareth left the building right along with him. Carl Sentence has stepped in as the replacement and is widely respected for handling an impossible job well. Pete remains the band's historical anchor, and interestingly enough, his own son Lee is now the drummer. A fun little family thread running through the whole thing. Still, it raises a genuinely fair question here. When you swap out the voice that defined a band's entire sound, are you really preserving the band? Or just very lovingly preserving its old songs? Finally, Great White, which honestly deserves its own miniseries. Things got complicated when singer Jack Russell and guitarist Mark Kendall split into 2 separate touring versions of the same band, leaving fans to actually research which Great White they'd bought tickets for before showing up. You had Great White and you had Jack Russell's Great White, both playing the hits, both trading on the same decades of history, and both locked in legal battles over who got to use the name. It created years of genuine confusion for fans and promoters alike, which is a wild thing to say about a band best known for a power ballad called Once Bitten, Twice Shy. Jack Russell's death in 2024 closed one chapter, but reopened the whole debate over which version actually represents the band's real legacy. This isn't a story about a lineup change anymore. It's a story about ownership, identity, and who gets to keep the keys to the legend. So there you have it. 10 legendary names still touring with nobody left who actually built them. I'm not saying these bands are frauds. I'm saying rock and roll quietly turned into a strange inheritance dispute. At what point does a band stop being the original band and become the keeper of its own legacy? You tell me. Did I miss one that belongs here? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if classic rock runs through your veins like mine, hit subscribe.
passionate one.